The inviolate convulsed, grinding tremors and shrieks of twisting metal reverberating through its hull, the sounds of great metal objects under monstrous stress. The noise of the vessel being crushed and twisted by some unseen force put Godric in mind of the agonized growls of a great beast. With each screech there followed a chain of rumbles and grinding sounds. Godric thought it was likely that whole sections of the ship were collapsing at this point, and it wouldn't be long before the entire vessel was torn asunder, its crew expelled into the void. Godric sprinted through the bowels of the groaning vessel. He knew these passages well. Scant hours ago, these corridors and their subsections in the below decks had been a hive of activity, teeming with chapter serfs and humming with the buzz of hurried motion as the crew prepared for the next great jump into the warp. Not anymore. The passages of the Black Templars frigate were silent now, but for the periodic straining of the outer hull, which echoed like the anguished cries of a tortured soul through the decks, and the thundering beat of Godric's armoured tread as he sprinted deeper into the vessel. Ahead, an open hatch led into a wide maintenance corridor. This was a shortcut that would, assuming the assault upon the ship's structure hadn't damaged it, allow him to emerge at the rear of the great sanctum of his light. It was here that the primary path deeper into the ship could be found, and with it the route to the warp engine's reactors that he sought. "You must hasten, brother. The ship will not hold out much longer at this rate. Void auspexes put structural integrity at 43% and dropping." The voice of Brother Lucas came to rough his vox speed, urgent in its tone. Godric rounded a bulkhead corner and barely acknowledged the gore that plastered the far wall as he passed. He did not have time to think. He did not have time to stop. He did not have time even to focus his rage into a righteous hatred for the Tyranid creatures that now so mindlessly consumed his fallen brothers. "I will be emerging near the sanctum soon, and with his blessing I shall pass through to the far side unscathed. From there, the reactor should be a straight shot," Godric replied. "A sound plan, brother. But I am picking up unusual auspex readings closer to the cure." "Analyzing now," came Lucas' reply. There was a brief pause as Lucas interrogated the vessel's sensor arrays. "I'm reading multiple signals emanating from the interior of the sanctum. There appear to be multiple empiric energy signatures. I can only assume some manner of Tyranid witchery awaits you. The most efficient solution is total eradication of the befalling infestation." Godric gave no reply. He had slowed now, and his breathing steadied. Before him lay a sealed bulkhead, dozens of inches thick, stark white in colour and emblazoned with a Black Templars cross. The chapter icon was coated in his battle brother's blood and purple Xenos ichor in equal measure. With one hand resting softly on the hilt of his power sword, Zeal, Godric began to take a cautious step closer. The step never landed. The bulkhead door came off its hinges, as if it weighed nothing, and hurtled toward Godric. Time seemed to slow to a crawl for the Space Marine. Godric threw up an arm in response. The door smashed into the ceramite plate of his armor and was deflected away, coming to rest against the wall of the corridor. Before it had landed, Godric was moving again. He headed towards the bulkhead from which the door had been torn. He tightened his grip on Zeal, twin hearts pumping furiously, body flooding with adrenaline. Coruscating psychic energy crackled around the frame of the broken door, illuminating the Tyranid monstrosity that waited beyond. The creature's nightmare form floated above what had once been the altar of the holy light. The lower half of the creature was a mass of writhing tentacles. What passed for a head was huge, extending into a vast, shroud-like carapace. Swollen masses of what appeared to be brain tissue pulsed with soft blue light from within. Extending from the base of the carapace was a dripping maw filled with long, sharp teeth. Tendrils of unwholesome energy forked and darted across the creature's form. This, Godric was sure, was the thing that had blasted the bulkhead open. As he looked upon its blasphemous visage, Godric felt pressure beginning to build within his skull and the vile sensation of the creature's psychic tendrils reaching into his mind. He was, however, a space marine. His mind had been steeled against such intrusions. He shook his head, shaking off the creature's mental assault. The Tyranid beast reared up in response, coiling backwards. Thank you so much for watching. If you're enjoying this video, please consider subscribing and liking. This helps me make more content from our beloved grim darkness of the far future. For now, let's continue. Godric sprung into motion, leaping in the direction of the altar, barely avoiding the psychic onslaught. In the wake of the floating Tyranid's attack, the pressure in his skull abated. As it did so, he registered a shape scuttling out of the shadows beyond the altar and moving toward him with speed. Godric reacted sharply, lashing out with zeal. His strike bisected the smaller Xenos creature mid-leap. The two halves of its body crashed to the deck, bubbling purple ichor leaking from the twitching remains. He could hear the scrabbling claws of more Tyranids now, many more. The noise was coming from the open bulkhead behind him. Soon he would be surrounded. As the larger Tyranid drifted backwards, gathering its power once more, Godric could feel the pressure within his head begin to rise. He pulled a frag grenade from his belt and tossed it deep into the opening behind him. The device rolled down the corridor with a series of metallic clangs before exploding. Godric was rewarded with a series of agonized squeals and hisses. Another of the Xenos creatures emerged from an open vent in the ceiling, dropping towards Godric from above. Talons lashed out, drawing sparks as they scratched across the surface of Godric's Keranite armor. Reacting on instinct, Godric grabbed the Tyranid's limb with his free hand and yanked it hard. The creature screeched and slashed with its remaining claws. Bony talons scraped against his armor to no avail. Godric pinned the creature to the floor with an armored foot. With swift slash, he cut cleanly across the beast's neck, severing its still screeching head. The grenade had bought Godric but a few seconds. Kicking the corpse of the slain alien aside, he turned back to the tentacled monstrosity hovering over the altar. Amidst the rage of the battle, a moment of clarity struck him. The smaller creatures were meant to die. They were simply distracting him as the larger creature recharged, ready to unleash its powers once more. He snarled, and beneath his helmet he felt blood trickling from his nose as the psychic pressure in the room built to an agonizing crescendo. Switching zeal to a two-handed grip, he sprinted back in the direction of the altar. The creature was ready for him. The time gained from the sacrifice of the lesser Xenos had allowed it to once more channel its empiric powers. A lashing arc of blue energy extended from its head like a fork of lightning, slamming into Godric's side. For a moment his existence became pain. Every nerve was screaming, every sense overexposed, his mind aflame. The Tyranid's psychic onslaught seared his soul. Then it stopped. Godric's senses came flooding back. He wasn't dead. The pain told him that much. He opened his eyes to find that he had fallen, felled by the oppressive energy of the witch, Beast's psychic attack. Struggling to right himself, he glanced at his left arm, only to see that it now ended above the elbow. The rest of his ruined limb lay upon the floor several feet away. It had been ripped clean away by the force of the psychic blast. It twitched slightly, a slight trickle of blood dripping from its ragged end. Before he could stand, a swarm of limbed Tyranids surged out of the vents and corridors, engulfing him beneath their mass. "Brother, structural integrity is reaching catastrophic levels. You are running out of time," said Lucas, shaking Godric back to action. Taking zeal in his remaining hand, he lashed out at the Tyranid swarm, cutting his way free. There was no pain, nor did he feel any fear. In their place, he just felt a heightened sense of awareness and a burning rage. The diminutive Tyranids pressed forwards like a shoal, unified in their movements as they sought to envelop him in their midst. They slashed and bit at him but failed to pierce his battle plate. Rage flowing through his wounded form, Godric lashed out, cutting the flailing creatures down with wide swings of his power sword. Striking out with armored boots, knees and elbows, he forged a path through the tide, pressing towards the floating Tyranid synapse creature. The pressure in Godric's skull was rising yet again. The blood trickling from his nose flowed faster, and his vision clouded. Tendrils of coruscating energy once more began to arc from the carapace of the Tyranid synapse creature as it coiled back like a serpent, a shimmering field of energy coalescing before it. Godric would not allow his crusade to end while this creature still lived. This time, he would not allow his opponent to strike. The swarm of Tyranids moved to block his path. He couldn't cut his way through them in time. He didn't need to. With a titanic effort, Godric drew back his sword arm and in one swift explosive motion hurled zeal towards the Tyranid monstrosity. The sword spun as it flashed across the room. Its disruptor field sheared through the film of energy that suffused the Tyranid's carapace, and the blade struck home with precision and force, burying itself hilt deep in the creature's head. A trickle of blood and displaced brain matter flowed from the wound. The alien's body ceased floating and collapsed to the ground in a crumpled mess of twitching flesh. At the moment of the creature's death, the swarm of Tyranids faltered, disordered by the destruction of the synapse creature. "The reactor is just up ahead, brother. Maintenance corridor to the mirth." The voice of Lucas came again. There was no time to retrieve a zeal. He muttered a brief prayer of thanks to the blade's machina spirit. The weapon had been his companion for countless crusades, and his only consistent ally in centuries of service to the god emperor. There was no time to grieve. Leaving the blade buried in the corpse of his foe, he charged through the reeling Tyranids, dashed past the altar and on through the bulkhead leading to the reactor core, bludgeoning any Tyranids foolish enough to block his path. The ship convulsed again, rocking Godric from his feet and hard into the wall of the next passageway. He recovered and continued his sprint, the hazard-striped door of the reactor now coming into sight. There would be no more crusades. There would be no more glorious victory. There would only be an ending. In that ending would be fire and death, and through fury, hatred, and purgation would his act be justified. Godric would use the last of his strength to punish these creatures for the sin of their existence. He was through the door, then across a long gantry that led to the reactor core. He could hear scuttling forms again now, just a few corridor turns away, clicking and scuttling frantically towards him. Godric didn't look back. The reactor core glowed brightly within its containment field. He grasped for his belt and unfastened the melter charge. It felt heavy in his remaining hand. The creatures were practically upon him, but he only needed a moment. He flipped the melter bomb's activation rune, and with a titanic effort he forced his arm through the searing containment field. The melter charge clicked into place against the reactor core's support structure. He barely registered the dozens of claws that skewered him from behind, and in his last moment, all he saw was light. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing and leaving a comment below.